Hey, good morning. I'm Paige Browning. It's Monday. This is Seattle Now. Washington state is making moves to regulate how federal agents operate here. A bill to ban face coverings for law enforcement just passed out of the state Senate. But the question is, can it be effective? KUOW's Amy Radil is here to break that down. But first, let's get you caught up. Washington state is bigger than ever. The state's population just crossed the 8 million mark for the first time, according to estimates from the U.S. Census Bureau. The Seattle Times reports we reached 8 million after adding 73,000 people last year, one of the fastest growing states last year. How'd we do that? The biggest population increase was from international migration. Washington's ranking didn't change. We're still the 13th most populous state. And tax day will be here before you know it. I know, gotta get those documents in order. But if you need some assistance with filing, the Seattle Public Library is offering free in-person tax preparation. As of today, you can get help at the Central Branch downtown, also at the South Park, Queen Anne, Broadview, and Douglas Truth branches. You can walk in, but the library recommends making an appointment. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. Washington state and Seattle are getting ready in the case that federal immigration enforcement scales up. Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson has issued a directive prohibiting civil immigration activity on city property. The directive also outlines the city and SPD's plans to monitor federal agents locally. Seattle Public Schools also has new guidelines for handling ICE sightings. And in Olympia, the Washington Senate's taking action. They just passed Senate Bill 5855 to ban face coverings for local, state, and federal law enforcement. But a big question remains about how much control a state or city has over federal agents. KUOW's courts and politics reporter Amy Radil is here to talk through the masking bill. Hey, Amy, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Senate Bill 5855 passed the Senate, goes to the House next. What would it do, and how would enforcement work?
Yeah, so we have some state and federal laws already that require members of law enforcement to identify themselves, their name, badge number, other information. But there's currently no restriction on masking, on them wearing masks. And, this kind of became an issue starting last year with immigration and customs enforcement agents wearing masks while arresting or detaining people on the street and at their court hearings. We all saw those images. This bill prohibits any law enforcement officer, including these federal agents, from wearing face coverings like tactical masks, gaiters, ski masks. There are exceptions for officers who are working undercover, as well as for people if they're using an N95 or helmets, kind of protective gear. But if someone is detained by an unlawfully masked officer, this bill gives them the right to sue.
Would there be an in-the-moment consequence for masked law enforcement? You're out on a scene, you see an officer with, a neck gaiter covering basically their whole face.
One thing is it has to be the person who is detained, not a bystander, who has the right to sue. But I don't necessarily think there would be a consequence in that moment because there's some differences between our law and a law that was passed last year, a similar kind of a mask ban that was passed in the state of California. They have a law, but it's tied up in court. And it says that an unlawfully masked officer is committing a misdemeanor. So there's a criminal penalty. So
Just for doing it.
Yeah.
Even if you're not detaining someone.
So I imagine that could be something that does have a consequence in the moment, maybe. But, here our penalty is a lawsuit if this bill becomes law. And so it's not clear that something would happen in the moment or that kind of lawsuit would be successful, someone suing a federal agent or agency.
Can you say more about where this bill came from, as you mentioned? And I'm thinking of all the images we've seen of ICE or other federal officers covering their face with balaclavas and neck gaiters.
Yeah, there's been a lot of outrage and fear over these new federal immigration tactics, and Democrats from state lawmakers, Governor Ferguson, and U.S. senators have been all calling for them to not use these kinds of masks. So State Senator Javier Valdez, he represents North Seattle, and he sponsored this original bill. And when he spoke about it, he mentioned, multiple incidents just in Washington state of masked federal officers stopping people, the roofers in Bellingham where they detained a bunch of people, and the confusion and the fear that that's been creating, where people don't know who it is and they see people, they think they're being abducted.
I know there was an incident also in the last several weeks in Seattle, up in the Aurora area.
Exactly. Yeah, that was another one that he mentioned.
Yeah. People testified about it in the Senate this month. And again, the Senate has passed this. What are the supporters saying?
More than 14,000 people signed in support of the bill for that public hearing in the committee, and 2,000 signed in to oppose it. So the 14,000, some lawmakers said, was really an unprecedented number. Some of the supporters who testified said that for them, masking is reminiscent of the tactics of the Ku Klux Klan, and, it really is just meant to instill terror in the people who are being confronted with that. So the Senate passed the bill along party lines last week, 30-19 votes. And one comment came from State Senator Mike Chapman. He's a Democrat who represents Port Angeles. Okay. And he has maybe the most analogous experience to an ICE agent because he worked as a U.S. Customs inspector back in 1999. Oh. He was responsible for catching Ahmed Rassam, the man who was found guilty of plotting to blow up the Los Angeles International Airport as a member of al-Qaeda. So he was caught crossing the border shortly before 9/11, and Chapman was part of the group that apprehended him. He talked about that experience and how it sticks with him in terms of his identity.
You can do good law enforcement. You can stand for something. And having your face known to the world is not something to be afraid of. It is something to be proud of.
And Chapman said his safety and his family's safety was a concern as this prosecution went forward, but he never sought to conceal his identity.
Who is opposed to this? In the camp who wants to keep allowing officers to wear masks, neck gaiters, what are they saying?
Senate Republicans talked about they had various different concerns and reasons that led them to oppose the bill. Some of them said they agree with the Trump administration's rationale that these immigration agents and their families do face an environment of increased threats to their own safety. Others, like Senator Jeff Hawley, he's a former Spokane police officer, right. And he said he understands people's anxiety about this issue, but he said what the Senate's doing here is going to be found unconstitutional. Hawley said it's beyond the pay grade of a state legislature to restrict federal tactics. And then kind of big picture, Senate Minority Leader John Braun said he sees this mask debate as just a piece of a deeper issue of ICE enforcement in blue states like Washington.
We're going to have to calm down and say, is there a way that we can allow our state and local law enforcement to cooperate professionally with federal law enforcement? Where that is happening around the country, Mr. President, we're not having these levels of conflict.
And so I think he's alluding to since 2019, our states had the Keep Washington Working Act, and it restricts local law enforcement from assisting in federal immigration enforcement.
I do want to ask along these lines, does this bill have any teeth? Can the state actually dictate what federal employees, federal officers do or do not do? I guess I'm just wondering, where is the precedent for this to actually work?
This is still sort of an open question because we're so early in these efforts by the states. The California mask ban is on hold right now. It hasn't been allowed to take effect because the Trump administration is challenging it in court right now. So they say that states don't have the power to enact laws governing federal agents and that banning masks will endanger their agents. So that's kind of their argument to the court. Here, Senator Yasmin Trudeau is a Democrat from Tacoma, and she said in her remarks on the Senate floor that it's very possible that this legislation will pass and will face a similar lawsuit.
There may be challenges to that, but there are very few moments, Mr. President, where we get to capture what we are hearing and feeling from the people that we serve. And for my community, it doesn't matter if they have an accent or what their skin color is or their immigration status. Everyone is afraid.
Amy, we're really hearing, as you could hear from Senator Trudeau, some really impassioned remarks on both sides of this, and 16,000 people or signing up to testify on either side. What are police themselves saying about this? You know, whether or not federal officers would have to follow this bill, sheriff's deputies and local police would have to.
Exactly. And so they're in kind of a strange position in terms of their reactions. So the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, that's kind of a statewide advocacy group, they opposed the mask ban. The Washington Council of Police and Sheriffs, which is more of like a labor group, also I think they signed in as other. They said they support the spirit of the bill, that officers shouldn't be masked, except in very exceptional circumstances. But they have concerns because they know this law, if it passes, is clearly aimed at federal agents. It's unclear whether the state has the ability to restrict those agents' behavior. In the meantime, the local law enforcement agencies say, they want their officers to be identifiable unless they're undercover, but they're just worried about unintended consequences, like an officer has some kind of piece of gear or face covering for a legitimate purpose, but someone, sues over it and their agencies end up caught up in something.
Okay, so sort of some complex arguments from the policing organizations. How about what comes next? How soon might this bill take effect or become enforceable?
I think it could be maybe several weeks or a couple months out. It passed and it's been referred to the House Community Safety Committee, so it's on the House side now. If it passes both chambers, Governor Ferguson supports it, and it has an emergency clause, so it would take effect immediately as soon as he were to sign it. And then the next question is it going to be enforceable against federal agents? The Constitution's Supremacy Clause says states can't pass laws that contradict federal laws. But there are some legal scholars who say if the state law allows officers to do their jobs in a reasonable fashion, it may survive a legal challenge. So there's a little more nuance than only the Supremacy Clause. And the federal judge looking at this in California asked some skeptical questions about that state's mask ban. She asked why agents only needed masks to do their jobs starting last year. So we'll see.
And Amy, that ruling could be any time. So once that ruling comes out today, sometime this week, that could maybe have some implications about how our bill is perceived and how it moves through the legislature.
Yeah, the path forward for sure.
Finally, Amy, are there any other bills moving through Washington's legislature that are addressing federal immigration enforcement?
Yeah, there's several. I don't know about all other chances, but there is a bill to penalize people who impersonate ICE agents. There's a bill to prevent some current ICE officers from someday seeking to work in law enforcement in Washington state.
Wow.
There's proposals for protections for immigrant workers from federal raids on their workplace. And then the legislature is looking at restricting automated license plate reader information, like what's gathered by flock cameras, gathered by law enforcement, to make sure that information is not used for ICE investigations.
Thank you for walking through everything with us on the mask ban bill. KUOW's courts and politics reporter, Amy Radil. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paige.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now, and thank you to our generous donors for the support you give the show. It means so much to us. You can give Seattle Now a boost right now by clicking the link in the show notes to donate and by following and reviewing the show on your podcast app. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Vaughn Jones, Andy Hurst, and Patricia Murphy. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Paige Browning. See you tonight for Evening Headlines.